Marquee Ditrion walked into the art store, ready to expand his collection. The gallery director eagerly attended to him, introducing a particular piece with a flourish. He explained it was the work of a rising star in the art world, fresh from winning acclaim at the Academy Art Exhibition. The painting, he said, depicted the moon goddess, embodying the divine and unattainable desires of humanity. The Marquis, seated and tapping his chair absent-mindedly, listened before remarking dryly, "Cliché." The director froze, then quickly bowed his head in apology, his earlier confidence crumbling like a poorly baked soufflé. Internally, he cursed himself for misjudging the Marquis, wondering what kind of masterpiece could possibly satisfy a collector of such refined tastes. This was, after all, the most demanding patron he'd ever had, and losing him would be unthinkable. As usual, the director promised the Marquis that the pieces he had selected would be delivered to his residence, silently vowing to impress him next time. Yet the Marquis cared little for the fame of the artists or their accolades. His true interest lay in the subject matter, nudes. Though he couldn't quite explain his fascination, he suspected it was the kind of curiosity that often led to awkward conversations and raised eyebrows. As the staff packed the selected frames, the Marquis's attention was caught by another artwork leaning against the wall. He asked about it, and the director stammered, waving it off as a subpar piece. Naturally, this only made the Marquis more curious. Ignoring the director's protests, he strode over to the frame. The director hesitated, explaining that the piece was rough, unpolished, and lacked the sophistication expected for someone of the Marquis's refined taste. While the model had a decent figure, the painting itself felt awkward and stiff, more like a student's first attempt than a masterpiece. When pressed about the artist, the director admitted no formal debut had been made, but promised to send details later. The Marquis didn't seem convinced, but left without another word, leaving the director silently praying he hadn't just doomed himself. Meanwhile, Miss Rodeis, the new tutor at the Pendant's mansion, was growing popular with the family's only daughter. One afternoon, the girl confided in her, complaining about her parents' obsession with collecting art. She dramatically declared that their home looked more like a gallery than a house, and worried aloud that they might lose everything if this craze continued. She explained that Bjorno had been gripped by an art fever for years. Miss Rodeis, trying to hide her amusement, responded with mild surprise, "Well, it's certainly better than stamp collecting." Their chat was interrupted by the girl's mother, who walked in cradling a new painting. The girl ran to hug her, calling her Mama in the sweetest tone, which earned her an equally affectionate reply. The mother thanked Miss Rodeis for her hard work and invited her to join them for tea, mentioning some fancy treats they'd just received. The tutor politely declined, though she appreciated the kind gesture. The mother then sighed in relief, confessing how grateful she was to have found a capable tutor after the abrupt departure of the last one. She asked Miss Rodeis about her background, noting she wasn't from Brno. When the topic of previous employers came up, the tutor hesitated, vaguely saying, "Oh, it's a family you wouldn't know." Before the mother could press further, a staff member appeared and whispered something in her ear. Apologizing, she excused herself, mentioning the arrival of an important guest. She promised to send the treats to Miss Rodeis and left before the tutor could insist it wasn't necessary. Alone, Miss Rodeis chuckled to herself and thought about her friend Corrida, who was probably waiting at home and wondering if she'd smuggled back any of those fancy treats. Riv's attention was drawn to a painting on the wall. She stared at it, wondering what kind of life allowed someone to collect such expensive pieces without a second thought. She admitted to herself that she used to ask those kinds of questions but had long since stopped. That world was far removed from hers, and dreaming about it seemed pointless. She reached out to touch the artwork, but a voice behind her stopped her cold. Quickly pulling her hand back, she thought bitterly that art was a secret she could never let anyone discover. Turning around, she found herself face to face with none other than Marquee Ditrion. The two of them stood in awkward silence, neither saying a word, until a maid appeared, breaking the tension. She addressed Riv first, but froze when her eyes landed on the Marquis. Recognizing him instantly, her tone shifted to one of reverence, bordering on fear. Riv watched the scene unfold and guessed he must be the important guest the Baroness had mentioned earlier. She recalled his reputation as a famously unsociable and wealthy man, known throughout Borno for his aloof and touchy nature. It was practically a miracle to see him anywhere in public. Hesitantly, she asked if he was Lord Ditrion. He frowned, clearly unamused, and demanded to know who she was. Embarrassed, Riv quickly bowed and apologized, stumbling over her words. Before she could finish, the gallery director came rushing in, breathless and panicked. He apologized profusely to the Marquee, explaining there had been a mix-up with the location. The Marquee brushed him off, clearly uninterested in excuses, and turned his attention back to Riv. He repeated his question. Flustered, she introduced herself as Liv Rodeis, a governess at the pendant's estate. He gave her a long look, then remarked that he'd remember her name before turning away without another word. 10 days earlier, Riv had been at Brett's painting store, lost in thought. Her life had taken a sharp turn since her artisan parents had died in a carriage accident, leaving her with a sick younger sister and endless medical bills. As the eldest daughter of a middle-class family, she had taken on more than she could handle and felt completely trapped. She saw herself as incompetent and doubted she'd ever escape the crushing weight of her responsibilities. Brett, the painter, called out to her, snapping her back to reality. He sighed and pointed out that her posture was stiff again, asking what was on her mind. She mumbled an apology. He shook his head and reminded her, half joking, half serious, that a nude model didn't need the poise of a duchess. Riv grumbled internally about her unusual double life as a governess by day and a nude model by necessity. The thought of anyone at the pendant's estate finding out terrified her. But with her sister's medical bills unpaid and her debts growing by the day, she couldn't see a way out. At this point, dignity felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The painter interrupted Riv's thoughts again, asking if she was sure she wouldn't allow her face to appear in the painting. Startled, she reminded him of their agreement. Only her back would be shown. He tried to persuade her, saying that even a hint of her face would make the painting sell for much more, enough to solve all her financial problems. She firmly refused, though her frustration was evident. Sighing, he relented, and she turned slightly, letting him continue his work. Now, in the present, Riv stormed into Brett's painting room, seething with anger. She accused him of breaking his promise and painting her face. Brett tried to defend himself, saying it was just her profile and no one would recognize her. Furious, she demanded he destroy the painting immediately. When he refused, she grabbed an object, ready to shred the canvas herself. But when she pulled back the covering, she froze. The painting was gone. Brett hesitated before admitting it had already been sold. Horrified, Riv demanded to know if her face was visible in the painting. Her mind spiraled into panic. She imagined the humiliation if her secret were exposed. What would people think of a governess who had posed as a nude model? She couldn't even fathom the consequences. Before she could fully process her fear, a knock came at the door. A visitor announced that he was there to collect the painting. Desperate, Riv rushed to the door and insisted the painting could not be sold because the model had not given her consent. Brett, clearly regretting his life choices, tried to calm her, suggesting they discuss the matter later, but Riv refused to back down. The visitor, looking increasingly uncomfortable, explained that he had no authority over the sale and was only there to retrieve the artwork. He added that the lordship was waiting in his carriage. Riv glanced out the window, spotting an elegant carriage outside, and her heart sank. Was the buyer sitting right there? She silently prayed this disaster could somehow be undone. Moments later, the visitor returned, looking apologetic. The lordship wishes to know why the painting cannot be sold, he said. Brett, sensing an escape route, suggested Riv explain the matter herself. She glared at him, saying through gritted teeth, "He wants to hear it from me? The model?" The visitor nodded. Riv sighed, already regretting everything that had brought her to this moment. Riv explained that, due to the nature of the painting, it was crucial to keep the model's identity confidential, and she did not wish to reveal herself. The man, unfazed, replied that if this wasn't possible, he would either take the painting or require a refund. Brett groaned at the mention of money, and Riv immediately shot him a look. "You gambled again, didn't you?" she asked sharply. He mumbled something incoherent, avoiding her glare. The visitor, clearly eager to wrap things up, handed Riv a card and instructed her to visit the address before evening to resolve the matter. "We can't keep the lordship waiting much longer," he added before leaving. When Riv finally got home, she felt a small wave of relief, knowing the painting hadn't been fully handed over yet. She was greeted by her younger sister, Corda, who ran up to her with a bright smile, calling her name and hugging her tightly. Riv hugged her back, with her exhaustion momentarily melting away. Corda noticed the weariness in her eyes and asked if she'd had a rough day, adding softly, "You've been working so hard." Riv smiled faintly, thinking to herself that as long as they could find a way to make money, they'd be fine. They just needed to figure out a way to keep everything from falling apart, starting with that painting. At the Pendants mansion later that day, Riv approached Lady Pendants, calling out to get her attention. The Baroness turned, her usual composed expression softening slightly. "Yes, Miss Rodeis? Do you need something?" Riv hesitated, her thoughts racing. She considered telling the Baroness everything, but quickly dismissed the idea. It would destroy the fragile trust they'd begun to build. Instead, she smiled nervously and reported that Million had performed exceptionally well in her lesson that day. Lady Pendants raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "That's unusual," she said with a small smile. "It seems I made the right choice hiring you." Riv nodded politely, forcing a smile, while inwardly praying her secret stayed buried for just a little longer. Rodeis was overwhelmed with confusion and uncertainty. 4 days had passed without any word, and she didn't know what to do next. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. 4 days should have been enough time. She spun around to see Marquee Ditrion standing there. She froze, utterly dumbfounded, and immediately wondered what he was doing in front of her. Her mind raced, flashing back to the buyer of the nude painting, and a sinking feeling took hold. Gathering herself, she stammered that the situation was complicated, but assured him she would do whatever she could, given the painting's price. The Marquis raised an eyebrow and asked what exactly she planned to do about the painting and how she intended to resolve the matter. Confused, she asked why the painting was even there. He explained calmly that the artist had sold it the very next day and that the transaction had been finalized. Her heart sank further. She protested that the painting violated the original agreement. He countered sharply that disputes between an artist and their model weren't the buyer's concern. Stunned, Riv asked if he hadn't expressed some willingness to consider the model's reasons for refusal. Didn't that imply he had intended to be considerate? The Marquis nodded slightly but added that he had ultimately purchased the painting because of the model in it. Then his tone shifted as he asked coldly, "And on what grounds does a governess in the Baron Pendants household speak to me like this?" Her stomach dropped. His words, and the way he said them, made her suspect that he knew she was the model. Was he testing her? Trying to make her admit it? Worse, what if he was close to the Baroness? She dreaded the thought of her employer visiting his home and seeing the painting. There was no way out. Hesitantly, she admitted she was the model in the painting. The Marquis didn't react the way she expected. Instead, he asked how he was supposed to believe her and if she had any proof. Flustered, she told him that Brett could testify, but he only scoffed, questioning what would stop both her and the artist from lying. He also pointed out that he had heard the model was adamant about keeping her identity hidden. Riv's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to convince him. Words weren't enough. She needed undeniable proof. With her heart pounding, she made a decision. Meeting his gaze, she told him he wanted evidence, and without waiting for a response, she shifted her posture and posed exactly as she had in the painting. The Marquis stared, his expression unreadable. After a moment of silence, he muttered dryly, "Well, that's convincing. Though I have to admit this is not how I imagined resolving a dispute over fine art." Riv took off her clothes to prove she was the model. The Marquis studied her and said the pose didn't match the painting. Embarrassed but determined, she adjusted herself, reminding herself to endure the shame for the sake of reclaiming the painting. She added small details to mimic the exact position. After a moment, he told her she could dress. Once she was clothed again, he stated that she wouldn't be able to pay for the painting anyway. She begged for more time, but he refused, saying he wanted the painting. She pleaded again, desperate for a solution, and he finally said the painting could be redone without the model's face. She asked if that would satisfy him, and he agreed, saying she could have the original if she provided a replacement. She hesitated, explaining that Brett worked quickly, and she wasn't sure if the quality would be the same. He said there was one condition: he wanted to observe the process. Her face turned pale, but she realized she had no choice but to agree. She was lost in thought about her conversation with the Marquee when Million called her name, snapping her back to reality. She quickly composed herself and asked what was going on. Million tilted her head, curious about why her tutor seemed so distracted, but carried on with her story, mentioning that her painting classes would start next week. Riv raised an eyebrow, commenting that it was the first time Million had shown any real interest in learning. Million grinned and admitted it was because of the Marquee. She wanted to have a reason to talk to him, knowing how much he loved art. Riv nodded, saying it made sense since the Marquee often visited to see what the pendant's family purchased. Million pouted, adding that her father wouldn't let her anywhere near him to avoid disturbing him. With a mischievous glint in her eye, Million asked what the Marquee was like up close, wondering aloud if he was as majestic as a statue carved by God himself. Riv chuckled, saying she had only caught a brief glimpse, and smoothly redirected Million's attention back to studying. Million groaned, muttering about the endless need for lessons. Privately, Riv couldn't deny that the Marquee was captivating, but what lingered in her mind wasn't his appearance, it was his unreadable, piercing gaze. Her thoughts were interrupted again when Million leaned closer and asked if she'd heard the rumors. Riv raised an eyebrow. "What rumors?" Million hesitated for a moment before lowering her voice. "Everyone knows he loves art, but they say there's something else he truly collects." Brett was invited to the Marquee's estate to redo the painting. He marveled at the tools set up for him, saying he'd never imagined working in such a place. Riv was lost in her thoughts, noting how the estate was surrounded by mountains and vast plains. The staff's loyalty ensured that whatever happened there stayed within the grounds, and she couldn't help but think that someone could get away with anything there. Her mind briefly flashed to the rumor cess, Million had mentioned about a hidden room in the basement where people were preserved as specimens. She quickly dismissed the thought, telling herself it was nonsense. It was just a painting, after all. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the Marquee's request to observe the process. Just then the Marquee entered, telling them he had ordered everything to be prepared in advance so their work wouldn't be interrupted. He asked if they needed anything else. Brett responded, saying everything was more than enough, almost too much, and that it was truly an honor. He promised to create a masterpiece for the Marquee. The Marquee then turned to her and asked if she planned to pose for a nude painting while covered. Before she could answer, Brett quickly intervened, assuring the Marquee that she wouldn't be covered and whispered for her to undress quickly. She thought to herself that he was trying too hard to impress the Marquee and felt he was being overly insistent. Still, with the Marquee there, she couldn't argue. The Marquee asked if Brett was always so heavy-handed while working, commenting that while he understood artists were sensitive, it was rather grating. Brett immediately apologized, promising to correct himself. She wondered if clients usually criticized artists like this, and briefly entertained the thought that perhaps the Marquee had asked to observe just to find fault with the process, but she dismissed it. He gave the order to begin, and as she assumed her posture, she thought about how tedious painting could be. She hoped he would tire of watching soon. The painting session began, with Brett guiding her on how to hold her posture and promising it would be finished soon. As they worked, the Marquee suddenly dropped his glass of wine. Brett rushed over to check on him, asking if he was all right. The Marquee explained that his hand had slipped. Brett quickly ran out to find a servant, ignoring her request to wait. Left alone with the Marquee, she felt uncomfortable. Even though it wasn't the first time she had posed like this, his gaze felt different, uncomfortably intense, like his eyes were touching her. She wondered how long he had been watching her. When Brett returned, he explained he couldn't find a servant. The Marquee decided it was time to call it a day. Brett begged for a little more time to finish, but the Marquee ignored him. As they left together, she noticed how empty the vast mansion felt. She mentioned it, but he explained that the staff had likely withdrawn to avoid disturbing them. She found it odd, especially since the glass falling looked more like it had been punched rather than accidentally dropped. He brushed off her concerns, suggesting the Marquee just liked the place quiet and that the mishap hadn't affected their work. As they walked, she couldn't shake the silence of the mansion, just as he'd said. Suddenly, she heard her name being called. The Marquee was summoning her. Startled, she shouted that she was coming, wondering why it felt like she'd drawn unwanted attention to herself. Despite her doubts and unease, the painting continued with the Marquee overseeing every detail. However, he kept interrupting with a series of small accidents. Frustrated, she complained to Brett, saying something was off because there had been too many interruptions, and they hadn't even finished the sketch after days of work. Brett reassured her, saying he'd work faster and that he had originally thought they'd be done quickly. Later, Million ran toward her, thanking her for coming to her birthday party. She wished Million a happy birthday, thinking to herself that she only came because she couldn't ignore the invitation. As she stood there, the guests murmured, making her feel uncomfortable as their stares lingered. Hoping to avoid more attention, she tried to slip to the back and leave quietly. In her haste, she bumped into a young man who cautioned her to be careful. She quickly apologized. He asked if she was Miss Rodeis, which shocked her for a moment. He introduced himself as Carmyle Marcel, and she remembered he was Million's art teacher. He mentioned how Million often spoke highly of her and that he had been eager to meet her. He expressed his pleasure in introducing himself, and she thanked him for his kind words. He asked her to call him by his first name, but she hesitated, finding it a bit forward. He explained he wanted to address her as Riv. She pointed out that they had just met and insisted they should keep things formal. He quickly apologized for making her uncomfortable and admitted he had gotten ahead of himself. He explained he wanted her guidance on teaching methods. She dismissed the idea of any particular methods. But he then asked for advice on maintaining boundaries, saying it was his first time teaching a young lady, and he wanted to be cautious. He offered to accept her advice in a letter if meeting in person was a burden. Understanding his concern, she said she might share a bit about Million. When he asked for her address, she thought he seemed like a good person and handed it to him. Just then, the noise from the crowd drew her attention as the Marquee entered the mansion. She wondered why he was there. Carmyle remarked that it was surprising since the Marquee disliked crowded places. She asked if he knew much about him, but he replied he only knew what others did. Lady Pendance expressed her gratitude for his presence, saying it was the best birthday gift for Million, as she had always wanted to meet him. Seeing Million's wish fulfilled made her smile. However, the guests began murmuring, questioning if the Marquee had come just for the birthday. They speculated there must be a more important reason, or that the Baron had somehow persuaded him. Some even suggested the Baron seemed too pleased, as if he were trying to arrange something between Million and the Marquee. She thought about how Million would feel if she heard those rumors. Her mind drifted to her former student and the accusation of seducing the Viscount's eldest son. The shame of that memory overwhelmed her, and she felt dizzy. She nearly collapsed, but was caught by Carmyle, who asked if she was all right. She assured him it was just dizziness and quickly decided to leave. 3 days later, she received a letter from the Baron informing her that lessons would be on hold because Million was unwell. He promised to notify her when they would resume. She worried about what had happened to Million and realized that with lessons on hold, her tutor fees would stop, making it difficult to manage her expenses for the next month. As she thought about this, Croydon walked past her. She asked if she needed anything, but Croydon said she was fine. Suddenly, Croydon started coughing violently, coughing up blood. Alarmed, she kept asking if she was all right. Roids asked where her sister's medicine was, and Croydon replied that it was finished. Turning to the table, Roids stared at the little money she had left. She picked it up, told her sister to wait, and quickly left. Running to the pharmacy, she arrived out of breath. The pharmacist looked at her and mentioned he had wondered why she hadn't come sooner. She asked him to get the medicine quickly, but he told her to catch her breath, saying rushing wouldn't make the medicine appear any faster. He added that at the rate she was going, she might collapse before her sister. As she waited, she noticed a newspaper on the counter with an article about a drug. Curious, she asked the pharmacist about it. He explained there had been an announcement about a new drug that was reportedly very effective for people with illnesses like Croydon's and might even cure them completely. Her eyes widened as she asked where she could get it. He told her it wouldn't be available in small pharmacies like his, and that it was 10 times more expensive than the regular medicine. She thought about how hard it already was to afford the cheaper one. The pharmacist pointed out that, since she worked for noble families, she might be able to use her connections to access the drug. He added that they both knew what she could afford and suggested she consider improving her life. He said she could catch the eye of a decent suitor, which might help her care for her sister and manage her burdens. He told her she couldn't take care of her sick sister alone forever and urged her not to shut people out. He said she needed someone by her side. She took the medicine and told him she was leaving. As she walked away, he called out, telling her not to dismiss his advice and to think about it. As she walked, she told herself not to be weak and to stay strong. Suddenly, she stumbled and fell, dropping the medicine. Panicked, she pleaded with people passing by not to step on it. Tears rolled down her face as she scrambled to gather it from the ground. Late that night, she thought about how exhausting the day had been. She was grateful that the medicine helped her sister through the worst of it, but she wondered how much longer they could manage like this. After laying Croydon to rest, she went to the church, the only place where she could find peace. As she sat there, she murmured softly, admitting to herself that she didn't believe in God because he had never answered her prayers. She thought about how, as a commoner entering a prestigious boarding school, she had faced everything alone. When her parents passed away and she had to move from one tutoring job to another, God was never on her side. Now, with Croydon as her only family, it felt like even that was being taken away. She wished someone would tell her she had done well and support her so she wouldn't collapse from exhaustion. All she ever wanted was someone to lean on. Tears fell as she wept. Suddenly, she noticed a handkerchief drop onto her lap. Surprised, she looked up and saw Marquee standing before her. She called out his name in shock. He told her that while God may listen, he does not grant wishes. He said it was humans who had the power to make things happen. He told her to pray to him instead, saying that perhaps she might receive a miracle. She admitted to herself that the words he spoke sounded so sweet. She wondered if the Marquee could truly answer a prayer even when God ignored hers. But the thought also crept in, what if he was only saying this to torment her because he thought so little of her? He called her name and reminded her that she always kept people waiting. Then he turned to leave. She suddenly shouted that she needed money, but quickly apologized, saying it was a slip of the tongue. She asked if he could lift the clause in her contract with Brett so she could take on other modeling jobs. After speaking, she grew silent, worried that her words might displease him or that he might use this as an excuse to get back at her. He asked if she would consider working extra hours, promising to compensate her generously. She responded with confusion, asking him to clarify. He told her he expected an answer and that she should return the handkerchief on her next shift. Then he left. She wondered what he meant by extra hours and thought her life seemed to be heading in an unexpected direction. The next day, she visited him at his place. She handed him the handkerchief and said she was ready to hear the details about the extra hours he had proposed. He told her he wouldn't explain unless she promised to do it and didn't want any unnecessary chatter. She agreed, saying she would do it. He then informed her that someone would be waiting outside to explain and have her sign the contract. He said he looked forward to working with her. A young man explained the extra hours to her. She would need to be in a room with the Marquee while undressed. Shocked, she asked what he meant. He reassured her that was all it involved. She wouldn't have to do anything beyond that, nor would she be put in danger. However, he pointed out that since she had verbally agreed, the Marquee would not accept a refusal. As she prepared to start, the Marquee thought about her. To him, she looked as solemn as a soldier heading into battle. He remembered when he first saw the painting. What caught his eye was the model awkwardly showing her back. Her uneasy posture carried a lingering sense of shame. Her bare back expressed despair. Though the painting itself was poor, it intrigued him. He had even hinted to the painter to capture her face as best as possible. He was curious about the expression a woman with such a back would have. As he reflected, his maid entered and asked if she should send the handkerchief to the laundry. He told her to throw it away, saying it still had the nauseating smell of paint. He then remarked that he was curious to see how the poor model would fare. He asked about her whereabouts and was informed that she was signing the contract. He ordered that she be brought to him once she was done, as they would start that day. The maid informed her where the Marquee was. As she approached the room, she thought about the place. Everything was so white, almost to an obsessive degree. It was well known that the Marquee had a compulsion for cleanliness. He always wore gloves, and no one had ever seen his bare hands. There were rumors about him being skilled in taxidermy or accustomed to killing, but those might have been exaggerated tales fueled by the mystery surrounding him. She wouldn't be surprised if such a man had strange hobbies or a dark, private life. She hesitated at the door, knowing he was behind it. Before she could knock, she heard his voice telling her to come in. Startled, she wondered how he knew she was there. She encouraged herself, reminding herself that it was just extra work and the pay was generous. She stepped inside. The room was stark and intimidating. She undressed as required, her thoughts flashing back to what she was told about the contract. She wondered if this was all she needed to do for the amount of money stated. The Marquee seemed in a bad mood, and she began to question if she had missed something she was supposed to do. At least, she thought, he seemed to like her body. She asked if that was all she was supposed to do. He responded by asking if his aide had forced her to sign the contract without explaining. She told him the aide had said she only needed to spend time with him while undressed. He confirmed that was correct. She admitted she thought he might want something more. He seemed offended and remarked that he had thought she was different from the other women who followed him, but now he saw he was mistaken. She quickly explained that she didn't mean it that way, but added that the situation wasn't exactly normal. He acknowledged her point, saying his tastes were uncommon, which was why he paid her to sit before him. Then, with a tone of disdain, he told her to stay quiet and be a pretty flower for him, adding that she wasn't quite worthy of being called a statue yet. She thought about the blatant sneer in his words. From the moment she signed the contract, he had shown no intention of maintaining even basic respect. It seemed he needed someone to insult freely, not as a person but as a fool. She told herself she was used to such treatment. Later, she met with the young man who took Million for her art class, Carmyle. He noticed she seemed quiet and asked if he had asked too much of her. She told him she only had something on her mind. He asked if it was something important, but she assured him it wasn't. She thought about how one day of work with the Marquee meant she didn't have to worry about rent or medicine for the month. Still, she felt so tired. Carmyle apologized if he had burdened her with his worries. She reassured him that he hadn't, and mentioned that the reason Million had stopped the lessons wasn't due to his teaching methods. She said she had received the same notification. Hearing this, he said he must have been too hasty, but knowing the truth made him feel better. She said she was glad she had someone to talk to about Million. Then she mentioned it was getting late and suggested they leave. He offered to pay for the coffee since he had asked for the meeting. She questioned him, and he added that if it bothered her so much, she could treat him next time. As he stretched out a hand to help her up, she thought about how kind he was, showing consideration in small ways without making a fuss. She reflected that if she were younger and in better circumstances, she might have felt something for him. But as she stood, she stumbled and fell onto him. Immediately, she heard her name being called. The voice calling her name turned out to be Brett. He waved at her and remarked how fancy it was seeing her there. Leaning closer, he whispered, asking who the man she was with was. She explained that he was Million's art teacher and that they were discussing teaching methods. Brett then turned to the man, asking him to take care of their Riv. The man simply replied in agreement. Brett mentioned that he was also a painter. Hearing this, the teacher responded with mild interest. Brett continued, saying that painting was a challenging yet invigorating pursuit for artists. She interrupted Brett, reminding him that he might be leaving his companion waiting. Brett acknowledged this, noting how forgetful he was. He leaned closer again, whispering to her that just between them he thought something good was about to happen. Wishing her well, he left. She glanced at his companion and thought to herself that the man didn't seem like Brett's usual crowd. The teacher noted the unexpected connection and asked if she knew Brett. She asked if he also knew him. He replied, describing Brett as an artist who had failed at every exhibition but had recently been boasting about newfound wealth. She thought to herself about this new patron and wondered if it could possibly be Lord Dittrion. Since that day, she began to observe Brett and the Marquee more closely during her painting sessions. Their interactions seemed normal, leaving her to wonder if it was just Brett spreading rumors. One day at the Marquis's house, she found herself watching him for a while. He noticed and asked if she had something to say. She denied it, but added that she always saw him drinking. He offered her a glass, pouring one before she could refuse. Not wanting to seem disinterested, she accepted. He told her it was quite sweet, but when she tasted it, she remarked that it wasn't sweet at all. He noticed and asked if she drank regularly. She admitted she wasn't used to it. He cautioned her to be careful, reminding her to keep enough of her senses to dress herself later, since he didn't have room to house a drunkard overnight. That night, the Marquis fell into a deep sleep but was disturbed by a terrible dream. His maid woke him, informing him that his bath was ready. As he rose, he reflected on his belief that God does not save humankind. Only humankind can save itself. The Marquis sat in his bath, lost in deep thought. Even after everything was over, the marks on his body still hurt from time to time. Sometimes he could smell blood and feel the crawling sensation of bugs all over his skin, pulling him back to that day. In those moments, he would think of an unblemished, untouched body, and it would bring him some peace. Until now, that calm had only been found in art. He had never experienced it with a living human body. Then, a memory flashed through his mind, the image of wine dripping from Miss Rodeis' mouth. He muttered aloud that it wasn't bad at all, but as the thought lingered, he shouted, saying he must be going mad. Meanwhile, Croydon was busy reading a book when her sister entered, calling her name. Rodeis held something in her hand and demanded to know what it was and why it had been hidden under the bed. Croydon, startled, asked why her belongings were being searched. Snatching the basket from her sister, she said it was nothing. Rodeis, however, accused her of working behind her back, asking what would happen if she got hurt. She reminded her sister that she bled easily and said it was dangerous to handle things like that. She told her she was supposed to focus on taking care of herself, not earning money, as she had promised to handle that. Croydon explained that she just wanted to be helpful. She said she saw how much her sister was struggling and thought if she could help, maybe Rodeis could rest a bit. She admitted she wished she could live normally like everyone else, if not for her illness, and not be a burden. Rodeis hugged her and apologized for being harsh. Croydon insisted she was the one who should apologize. Rodeis reassured her, promising that she would get better soon. She mentioned a new medicine and vowed to find a way to cure her illness. Determined, Rodeis went to Hylop, one of the largest apothecaries in Borno, hoping to find information about the new medicine. As she approached the entrance, a security guard stopped her. He asked if she had a reservation and said he needed to verify her details before letting her in. When she admitted she didn't have one, He explained that Hylop stored sensitive medicines and only allowed entry to those with reservations. She handed him a newspaper article discussing the new medicine and asked how she could get a reservation. He apologized and told her all the slots were already booked. Looking into a mirror nearby, she stared at herself and thought how she hadn't anticipated this. Of course, a place designed for nobles wouldn't accept someone like her. Her mind wandered back to what a pharmacist had once told her, that she could use her connections since she worked for a noble. Then, her thoughts drifted to the day in the church when the Marquee had told her to pray to him for her miracle. She found herself questioning why he came to mind at that moment. The Marquee wanted to know more about Miss Rodeis, so he asked his aide to investigate her. The aide reported that her time at Clemen's boarding school had not been smooth. Being in a co-ed school and a commoner among nobles, she likely faced gossip. As for her previous jobs, she had a good reputation as a temporary teacher, but her roles as a governess were less favorable. At Viscount Karen's household, she was dismissed for allegedly trying to seduce the eldest son. At Count Lucette's, she was fired for supposed lack of teaching abilities. However, there seemed to be other reasons behind those decisions. Rumors had already spread as if they were facts. The Marquis responded that he now understood why she fled from the capital to the countryside. A woman without support is more vulnerable to gossip. After dismissing his aide, he remarked to himself that this would be an easy match. The more someone had to hide, the easier they were to manipulate. Walking down the street, Rodeis heard her name being called. It was Rita. She complained about how hard it was to catch her these days. Noticing the catalog from Hylop Apothecary in her hand, she expressed surprise, pointing out that people like them wouldn't dare step into such a place. She commented that things must be going well for her. When Rodeis asked what she meant, Rita explained that someone had seen her riding in a fancy carriage. Rodeis immediately realized it was the Marquis's carriage, which always took her to and from the estate. Rita asked if she was in trouble, noticing that she did not look happy. She replied that she was fine and only doing simple clerical work. Rita then asked if she was still working as a governess. Rodeis questioned where she had heard that, and Rita said she had only heard it as a rumor. Rodeis asked if she believed it, but Rita said she was only concerned because gossip was common in town. Rodeis dismissed it, saying that rumors were just rumors. When she arrived at the Marquis's estate for her extra hours, he immediately noticed her sighing. He asked if she found the work tedious. She apologized, saying she didn't mean to give that impression. He then directed her to a box nearby. Opening it, she found an expensive necklace. When she asked what it was, he told her to put it on, saying he thought it would suit her, just like the wine. He told her to keep it, but she was shocked. He said if wearing it felt burdensome, she could sell it. She responded that she couldn't sell such an expensive piece of jewelry. He reminded her that she had said she needed money. She replied that the extra payment he gave her was already more than enough, and a drastic change in her lifestyle would look suspicious. He remarked that her life already seemed suspicious, mentioning the luxurious carriage he provided, which had caused misunderstandings. He asked if she wanted him to walk her home himself. She quickly refused, saying she asked nothing of him. Pulling her gently with the necklace, he leaned closer and told her to ask something of him. She thought to herself that this wasn't a request but a command. Why did the Marquis keep wanting her to say such things? She asked him why she would make a demand of him. He asked her why she wouldn't. Then he told her he was curious and wondered how far someone who stood tall, even when stripped bare, could be pushed beyond their limits. She told him that if he disliked her, there were other ways to show it. He cut her off, saying he didn't understand why she thought he disliked her. Wasn't there more evidence to suggest she had caught his attention? She asked him what he meant. In her mind, she finally understood. This was just how he was. A man with a perverse taste for watching someone sit bare for hours. Someone who wielded arrogant and ruthless words as if it were his right. She told him she understood that he was curious about her, but she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. He replied that she was more difficult than expected. He added that her stiff posture showed she was just as rigid in character. He ended the conversation, saying that was enough for the day. After that day, the Marquee stopped coming to their painting sessions. The extra hours she worked were also halted indefinitely. To make up for lost time, Brett sped up his painting process, and her lessons with the girl resumed. The girl, clearly upset, admitted to her that she had a problem. She explained that the truth behind her missing classes was because she had fought with her friends. She asked if that was true, realizing there had indeed been something wrong. The girl explained that since the day the Marquee came to her birthday, her friends mocked her, saying she had bought his favor. In anger, she told them that the Marquee was not someone who could be bought with money, and that they were the ones being materialistic. Then they started crying. She asked the girl if she wanted to make up with her friends. She replied that the situation made her uncomfortable, even though her friends weren't bad people. She added that while the day was rough, she wanted to fix things. Acknowledging that the root cause of this trouble was likely the Marquee, and more precisely people's desires, she suggested the girl try. The girl thanked her, saying she would talk to her friends. She responded that it was splendid. Later, Rodeis found herself deep in thought about whether to accept the Marquee's favor. Returning to a normal life was what she wanted, but the decision wasn't simple. Walking alone on a deserted street, she noticed the quietness and began hearing footsteps. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the steps became louder and more real. She realized someone was following her. She thought the rumors about her improved situation might have drawn attention. Regretting not being more careful, she felt a hand reaching for her. Forcing her way out, she wondered if anyone would come if she screamed. Considering throwing the money she had to distract the pursuer, she stumbled and fell. Realizing screaming might be useless, she saw the attacker raise a piece of wood to strike her. She heard herself call for help just as a shot rang out. The attacker fell, hit in the head. Shocked, she wondered if he was dead, and who could have done such a thing. She felt a hand touch her from behind. Shocked, she turned around, only to see the Marquee's aide. He asked if she was all right and told her to come with him as the Marquee was waiting for her. He led her to him and explained that she had twisted her ankle when she fell but would be fine with enough rest. The Marquee asked if she had any wounds. After the aide left, he asked again if she was all right. She expressed her deep gratitude, saying she didn't know how to repay his kindness. He told her the area was unsafe. She said it wasn't usually like that and added that the alley wasn't normally rough. He told her the problem was that she had become a target, likely due to the misunderstandings they had discussed earlier. He then promised to arrange accommodations for her. She fell to her knees and said that was far too much. He observed that she didn't seem to welcome his interest. Then he asked her if she could confidently say she could continue living as she had. He warned her there was no guarantee incidents like today wouldn't happen again, and each time she would have to rely on luck to escape. He reminded her that their contract stipulated her service was required until he no longer needed it. He added that he didn't want her neglecting her duties over trivial matters and that he intended to teach her unscathed. He told her it was fortunate he happened to be in her neighborhood that day. She asked why he was there, and he said she had been calling for him desperately. He added that if he had known she would get hurt, he would have acted faster. Thinking about it, she asked if he had been the one who fired the shot. His mind drifted back to a few hours earlier, when he and his aide were watching as she was being chased. He had taken his gun and fired at the attacker when he was at the perfect range. He asked if she still sought God in the chapel, then informed her that he had indeed been the one who fired the shot. He remarked that it had been a while since he had felt the thrill of victory. She and her sister moved into the new house he had arranged. Her sister was surprised and asked if they were really going to live there. She asked her if she liked it, and her sister answered that she did. For a while, peaceful days followed. They now lived in a safe and warm place, free from danger. There was also a plentiful supply of medicine for her sister. One day, as they sat at the dining table, her sister asked if she was going to work, and wished her a nice day. She thanked her for the kind words. In her thoughts, she admitted that everything she enjoyed, the safety, the comfort, and her sister's well-being was all because of his interest in her. And she needed it. Miss Rodeis yelled at Brett because he said he couldn't go for the painting work that day. She worried if the Marquee had approved it, but he explained that he had delivered a letter yesterday. She pointed out that this wasn't just any job and reminded him that he had been working on it lately, asking why he had suddenly changed his mind. He told her he was feeling unwell. She asked him to be honest with her for once. And he admitted that finishing the work quickly would be problematic. When she asked how, he explained that completing it would end his connection with the Marquee, and he hadn't secured a patronage contract yet. Surprised, she asked why he needed a patronage contract and if he had been gambling again. He assured her he hadn't and told her the truth, that while drunk he caught the eye of a wealthy nobleman and mentioned securing a patron. Her thoughts drifted to what Carmyle had said, and she imagined he might have been using the Marquis's name. Brett told her about the man he had been with the other day, thus explaining that he was a famous businessman who offered to sell his paintings in the capital and even hold an exhibition for him. However, since he hadn't debuted yet, he needed proof of his skill, a guarantee of some sort. She thought that, even with that reason, he was going too far. He explained that the money for the venue's rent, which he had already paid, would be waived if he could bring a patronage contract. Surprised, she asked if he had really paid for the venue. She questioned whether he thought all of this sounded suspicious. He yelled back that she must think he was an idiot because he hadn't debuted yet. She told him that wasn't what she meant, but he cut her off, saying the Marquis only asked him to paint because he liked his work. He insisted he just needed more time, as his next piece would involve a groundbreaking oil painting technique that would captivate the Marquis. At the Marquis's home, he read Brett's letter and said that if the painter was too ill to work, there was no need for her to come either. He asked if she had come all the way just to tell him that. She replied it was partially the reason and also to express her gratitude for his kindness. He reminded her that she had already thanked him the very day it happened. Miss Rodeis thought about how the Marquis had only seen her as an accessory until now, never anything more. Yet his words stayed with her. He had said it was strange how she seemed like she would be all right, even if a little tarnished. She reflected on the tension between them, knowing she wasn't naive enough to ignore it completely. Wanting to shift the conversation, she asked if he had attended a lady named Million's birthday party. She pointed out that his presence there had sparked much speculation. She told him that she didn't know him very well, but had heard that he didn't mingle much with the nobility, so she wondered why he had attended the event. He responded by asking why she cared. She explained that she was Million's governess and that since he had visited, the girl's life had been in turmoil. She said she was simply a teacher concerned about her students' well-being. He told her he had gone to the party to see her because the person she was there seemed different from the one he knew. This made her wonder if he had truly attended the party just to see her. She found it hard to believe and said so, but he remarked that her response was rather lackluster. She admitted that she wasn't sure how to interpret his interest in her. He told her he hardly thought about it and left it up to her. She reflected on how he had always treated her differently. A part of her wondered if he liked her, but another part doubted it. She decided to change the subject and told him about her sick sister. He remarked that it was unfortunate. She mentioned hearing about a new drug from the Dominion Medical Institute that could improve her sister's condition, but she had no way to obtain it. She asked if he could help her find information about it, but quickly changed her request to ask if he could help with her sister's treatment. She said she would do anything. He told her she had no value to offer him, but then paused and added that there might actually be something. He complimented her, saying she amazed him, and told her to keep entertaining him. If she did, fortune would visit her doorstep every day. He offered to introduce her sister to a good doctor. Later, when she and her sister arrived at Berryworth Mansion, they were greeted by a butler who introduced himself as Philip Philmond. He asked to be called Philip. Her sister introduced herself as well, As he walked them in, he asked if they liked fruit tarts. When Rodeis said yes, she couldn't help but notice how warm and welcoming the mansion felt compared to the other properties of the Marquee. Philip mentioned the large arboretum and glass greenhouse behind the mansion, saying it was his pride and joy. He added that it was a lovely place for a walk and encouraged them to visit it sometime. She agreed, saying it sounded wonderful. Her sister, however, seemed to have her thoughts elsewhere. She asked if the owner of the mansion was the one helping them and what he looked like. Rodeis assured her it was the same person. Croydon commented that there were others in the world who were also unfortunate, yet someone who lived in such a grand mansion was quick to help them. She wondered aloud if he might want something else, perhaps her sister's beauty. Rodeis thought to herself that the Marquis did not want anything like that from them, though it was close to the truth in another sense. Philip led them to meet the Marquis, but Rodeis cautioned that her sister had bad experiences with doctors and might get scared. Her sister confidently assured her that she was fine and told her not to worry. Philip then asked if they were ready to meet the master. As they approached the room, Rodeis overheard a conversation inside. Someone was speaking to the Marquis, saying they still hadn't received the message and asking what they should do. The Marquis responded, asking if he should consider their feelings before ordering them to reject the proposal. The atmosphere felt different to Rodeis, and something told her that the Marquis was displeased. She wondered if this was a bad time. He turned to her and asked if she could ride. She said yes, explaining that she had taken a few lessons. He then asked if they could go for a hunt. Out on the field, Miss Rodeis asked the Marquis if he truly liked hunting. He replied that he did not, explaining that it was something he did because he had to. He told her that sometimes taking a life was unavoidable. Seeing the shock on her face, he asked if it was her first time witnessing someone shoot. She told him she had never been exposed to it before. He remarked that she must have been raised delicately. She replied that if she had been, she wouldn't be there with him. He laughed and said he had a feeling she was only doing this to keep him company. She thought to herself that he was right and admitted it aloud. She also thought about how their bond seemed to be growing, and, if she were honest, she was secretly pleased by it. He noted how quickly she admitted it. She explained that she had already thought long and hard about his interest in her. When he asked what she had decided, she told him she had chosen to accept it. She said she would come when called and leave when told. If he offered help, she would take it. He then asked what she would do if he told her to undress. Without hesitation, she said she would. He instructed her to signal for everyone to return, saying they would finish the hunt there. She was about to ask if the hunt was over, but he interrupted, reminding her of her earlier words about undressing. He then asked if she preferred the outdoors for such an act. Later, it was reported that her sister's examination had been completed. Rodeis watched anxiously as the Marquis discussed the results with the doctor. He noticed her worry and remarked that people might think she was the patient. He asked why she was still concerned, especially since the examination had gone well and her sister was not so young anymore. She explained that a doctor had once bled her sister excessively, nearly killing her, and that the same doctor had insisted on exploratory surgery on her sister's head. He called that doctor a quack and reassured her that the physician he had provided was highly skilled, his personal doctor, and there was no need to worry. She expressed her gratitude. He offered her a smoke, mentioning that it helped lift his spirits. As he smoked, his thoughts drifted to memories of the war. He recalled the horrible sensations it left him with, and the recurring urges for violence, which seemed to be suppressed only by witnessing death and the cold stillness of a body. Noticing that she appeared uncomfortable, he commented that perhaps it was too much for her. He then added that she would learn from him, drawing closer as he spoke and kissed her. After so long, our two mains kiss. Riv, our redhead heroine, thinks to herself that the Marquis has a bitter scent of withered leaves. The kiss drags on for up to an hour when suddenly Marquis pulls away. He gets up and dusts himself while saying that hopefully that was helpful. With a flushed face, our redhead says helpful. He says a helpful demonstration on how to roll the smoke in her mouth. Apparently, before the kiss, he wanted to gift her a horrid habit of his, smoking. He says that he can't say he's experienced in teaching, so he doesn't know if this lesson will be effective. He glances at a woven basket filled with wrapped goodies. She picks one up and offers to him with a frightful face. He accepts it and says, but since she's diligent, he's sure she will pick it up. Later, we see Riv and her baby sister Cordia eating. Our girl thinks to herself that for 3 days after, her life was a mess, even though she knew well he couldn't possibly like her. The fact remained that she was the only exception to his usual fastidious demeanor, and the urge she felt to throw herself at him for a greater thrill left her confused. She never knew she had such desires, like being caught in a sweet trap and she finds herself struggling. She insults herself for her actions. Later that evening, we see Riv and Million going on a stroll. Cordia says to Riv that, and for her next lesson, could they? Riv tunes her out as she thinks that if only she could understand the Marquee's heart a bit. Next, Million suddenly says that Miss Rodeis should be careful. Million glares at a man on a horse as she says that he almost bumped into them. He apologizes. Riv says that the mansion seems busy today. Is something going on? Million says, oh, Miss Rodeis? The man on the horse says that, hasn't she heard? Cardinal Calliope is visiting Buono. Riv thinks to herself, Cardinal? Unlike the countless honorary nobles in every country, a cardinal is one of the very few specially selected. They hold a position that could lead the church in the future. Moreover, they don't belong to any one nation, and even the most powerful nobles can't treat them lightly. Million gushes as she says that perhaps her parents will host the cardinal during the visit. Riv says to her that at the Pendants Barony, that would be a great honor, but if the cardinal himself is coming, wouldn't Lord Dittrion take charge? Our little girl says that the Marquee usually doesn't care about visitors, no matter how important. Then she darts her eyes to the side and moves closer to our main girl's ear, as she says, of course, it might be a different cardinal. Actually, she has a reason for being so certain. Mr. Marcel knows one of the nobles accompanying the cardinal. Riv echoes the man's name in question. Million grins and says yes. So naturally, they'll be hosted at their house. It's always more comfortable where you know someone. That's why Mr. Marcel has been making such frequent visits these days. Rivs thinks that if he's hosting the cardinal, he must be from quite a prestigious noble family. What exactly does Mr. Marcel do to have such acquaintances? Why is he living as an art teacher in this rural town? Then someone calls her name, successfully pulling her out of her reprieve. She turns around to see Marcel running toward her. Million says his name with a smile. When he approaches them, he lets out a breathe and says that he heard she moved in a hurry. He went on to ask, is everything all right? She says yes, everything is fine. But how did he know she moved? He tells her that he found out by chance while talking with Million. Was it supposed to be a secret? She says no. It's just that she hadn't mentioned it, so she's a bit surprised. Then she asks him if he did need something from her. She says that he always does, though he doubts she feels the same. The statement catches Million, and she gives the cardinal he full attention. Then she laughs and says that she forgot that her mother asked her to do something. She'll be off now. The two of them she's leaving behind should have a good time. Riv looks unimpressed as she says, shall they have a quick chat? Marcel smiles, pleased with her reply, and says yes, thank you. The duo walk to a bench and sit. Our heroine wastes no time to call his name and state her observation. She says that he seems to be quite well informed. He says that he just hears a lot of stories. There are many nobles who cherish and love beautiful art, and when you associate with such people as much as he does, she gets to know a few things. She thinks to herself that perhaps he might know a bit about the Marquee. She says then, does he know anything about Lord Dittrion? Oh, it's just that she heard he won't be hosting the cardinal this time, so she was curious. Then she trails off. Marcel then says Miss Rodeis. He suggests that she doesn't take too much interest in the Marquee. Marcel advises our main girl against accepting Marquise's advances. He calls her name and says that she shake too much interest in the Marquee. She says, pardon? And thinks to herself, what? Why would he? Marcel rubs his hands down his face as he says that he feels like he's watching a friend go down a dark path. So Miss Rodeis, is she interested in Lord Dittrion like everyone else? She laughs as she says no, not at all. Then she wonders that she must have been mistaken earlier. Then she says that it just feels like she'll be bumping into him a lot through Million, so she thought it best to know. He says, well, to put it simply, he doesn't know much about him. She asks, he doesn't know? Yi tells her yes. He doesn't even know which country Lord Dittrion's family is from. And since his family history is shrouded in mystery, naturally, so is his past. They don't even know if he's really a Marquee. She argues that everyone calls him one. He says yes, he's been Marquee Dittrion since he appeared in Buerno. But he couldn't have been a Marquee from the very beginning, could he? Later, as our main girl walks down the street, she thinks to herself, what on earth did that mean? Mr. Marcel spoke as if it were all a joke. She remembers when Marcel said in a light tone that, of course, it's all just rumors. She thinks that, but she can't help but feel concerned. Then a drunk man staggers past, and she looks shocked to see him. The man murmurs that he had too much tonight. She thinks to herself that she didn't plan to stay until late. That unexpected meeting really waylaid me. She needs to get back quickly. She moves to get going when she hears tires squealing on the road. She tuns to the carriage that has parked close to her and sees our male lead seated inside it. He turns to her and says, "That's he finished later than expected." She calls out his name in surprise. She steps into the carriage and the two sit across each other in tense silence. She breaks the silence and says, "Lord Dittrion, why is he here?" He asks in return's hat, "What sort of escort would he be if he didn't come, Miss Rodeis?" She says that he came all this way to escort her. He says that he heard she was afraid of dark streets, so she planned to take a carriage after her shifts. How was she planning to get home without him? She says by taking a shared carriage. He says that a shared carriage wouldn't drop her off at her door. She thinks to herself, did he really come just for her sake? He says that she planned to walk the dark streets alone despite being afraid. He says that she's more reckless than he thought. He thinks that this is the first time she's seen him since that day. He seems so composed. She knew it, only she's been thinking about their kiss all this time. Someone tells them that they have arrived. She bows her head slightly and says, "Thank you for bringing me home. She'll make sure this doesn't happen again. Please, he should get inside safely." She opens the door for her and hopes she's been reviewing their lesson. She wonders, what did he just say? She says, "Pardon?" He tells her that if she needs a refresher, allow him. She well and grips the handle to the carriage door tighter. Then we see a flashback where a bright red warning light flashes in her head. Someone says that they've heard he has a severe mental illness and hates physical contact. He can't even shake hands or hold long conversations. They've never heard of any noble dining him. That's why everyone's surprised by his rumored friendship with Lord Pendants. Camel's words, the warning sound. The person who spoke is Camille Marcel, and the flashback belonged to our girl. She says that in that case, the image of the Marquee before her swirls into a chaotic mess in her mind. No, she knows what people say about him. But why not? She thinks that those words don't apply to her, do they? That's right, only she knows the side of the Marquee, like the scent of a strange cigar. She turns to our male lead and says, "Please remind me, my lord." He tells her certainly. He draws closer to her. Sunset basks the city. Before long, they received Corrida's diagnosis. Our sisters sit on a couch as the youngster urges Riv to open the letter and read out its contents. She tells her, "Just a moment, Corrida." Riv hopes that it should be good news. She opens the letter with shaky hands as Cordia asks, "What did they say?" She peeks at it and complains that it's so many words. Suddenly, Riv gets up and hugs her sister. Riv says that it's not an untreatable disease. They say it might even be fully cured. Cordy says, "Really?" Based on the results, Corrida has an illness called scerbera. It's a new disease discovered less than 3 years ago. Research is still ongoing. With consistent treatment and new medication, a full recovery is expected. The doctor says that his lordship isn't yet privy to the results himself. However, he said he would proceed with the treatment plan for Miss Corrida's recovery, whatever it may be. That means he'll support Corrida's treatment in any way possible. Finally, Riv says that her sister is going to get better. She truly will. Later we see Ditrion asking Riv if she has reviewed all the documents. She says yes, thank you, she's ready to work today. The documents remain in his hands as he says so. This her sister's diagnosis? She nods and says yes, thank you, my lord. He introduced us to the doctor, so she thought it was only right to show him. Thanks to him, her sister will receive proper treatment. And about the future medial expenses. He asks her if she is worried that those minor expenses would burden him. She bows her head and says, of course, she knows that wouldn't be the case. She thinks to herself that she got so caught in the good news that she forgot for a moment. Ditrion looks at her with mouth open. The Marquee and she have a one-sided relationship. He tells her that if it really bothers her, then as he said before, she should entertain him. That'll be payment. She asks how. He sighs and says that's for her to figure out. She thinks to herself that she has to keep the Marquee interested, entertain him, show him what he wants. She unpops her buttons and thinks give him what he desires, and she strips. He inspects her once injured ankle and says that she's healed, but she flinches. Then they become intimate. We get an insight to how the main guy thinks of intimacy. Next we see the backstory of our male lead. He was a boy born on the streets. He never knew his father. His loving and diligent mother was a humble woman and one of the most devout believers in the village. He loved watching her pray. She looked more peaceful and happy in the chapel than at any other time. The boy prayed, too. Please protect this peace. But God did not heed the young boy's prayers. The year he turned 7, war broke out. A bomb struck the chapel, burying his mother the rubble. Her mom's last words were that God should guide these poor souls to his side. His mother's face was peaceful, as if she was praying. Only then did the boy realize the reason his mother had chosen this small village chapel, why her prayers were serene even in the midst of war. It was because of the meeting that would come after her death. She had been waiting. How could she make such a choice for him? It wasn't unusual for priests to take in war orphans, so no one found it strange. God must have sent her to him. That day, the boy realized how high a position that priest aspired to. He also realized how much he resembled his father. Morning sun wakes our heroine up from Ditrion's bed. The Marquee had disappeared, as if it had all been a dream. She goes to shower. She thinks to herself about the marks left on her body, and the lingering warmth told her otherwise. For some reason, she felt odd. Ditrion tells her as she slept that he has instructed the artist to stop working on the paintings for now. He kept pestering him to sponsor him, claiming he'd developed a new art technique, but when he refused it, the artist fell ill. Riv rises from the bed and says that she knows Brett can seem a little heedless, but she's sure he didn't mean any harm. It's because someone has been influencing him lately. He tells her that she's quite eager to defend that artist. What's the nature of their relationship? She asks pardon. He sits by her feet on the bed and asks, is there something between you two he should know about? She says no. When she settled in Buerno and was looking for a house, Brett saved her from being scammed. He even suggested she take up modeling as side job when I was struggling. Our guy says that the artist's behavior hasn't been the best, so it might be wise to distance herself a bit. For her sister's safety as well. She says, pardon? What does Corita have to do with? He says, oh dear, it seems she doesn't know who the artist is involved with. They're quite unsavory characters. She could be in danger just for being his model. If she tries to help him and end up getting hurt, your poor sister would be left all alone. She thinks that if the Marquis is saying this, they must be more than just common thugs. She'd like to warn Brett, but right now, Corita's well-being is her priority. He turns around and tells her to choose her associates wisely. Then she thinks, and there are other things she need to take care of. She says that his lordship wouldn't just stand by if she were in danger. He turns to look at her. He smirks and asks her if she is sure. She says that he never has. He says, so this is what it feels like to teach a student who learns quickly. He trues to be intimate, and she tries to stop him. He says that a diligent student a reward, don't they? Then he becomes intimate with her. While in the shower, someone knocks on the door. Riv hurries out and opens the door. She says sorry to have kept you waiting. Then she sees that the visitor is Mr. Adolf, who is Detron's personal assistant. Adolf wears a pair of round glasses on his face as he addresses out girl with her last name. He says that he knows it's impolite this early morning, but there's an urgent matter. He gives her a brown bag and says, "Take this." She asks, "What is this?" "It's a contraceptive pill." When Riv realizes what is in her hand, she stares at it, as if it is a bad omen. Adolf bows his head and says, when they signed the contract, he said there wouldn't be any personal matters. He didn't foresee this situation. This is as many as he could get right now, so if she needs more, she should please ask. She looks at his dumbfounded. She thinks, should she call this kindness? She grips the brown bag firmly and says, "Thank you for taking care of me." She thinks, she supposed she should say it. From now on, she might spend more time with Marquee. They might have moments like this again. Adolf says that from now on, Dr. Gertrude will give her an examination every month. It's a simple procedure, so don't worry. She says that she understands. She will let him know if there's anything else. He'll have the carriage ready, so call for it whenever she wants to leave. Detron says that Adolf should suspend the painting for now. Adolf says that, but my lord, that painter might run away before the contract ends. Actually, this works out well, Detron says that since there's someone involved with him, he won't have to go through the trouble himself. He'll inform Miss Rodeis about stopping the work himself. He can already imagine her reaction. Sometimes it's amusing to see her caught off guard. If there's nothing else to report, he may go. Adolf says, my lord, if he likes Miss Rodeis, why not keep her by his side? Detron says that the best works deserve their proper price. Only then can he truly own them. If he just has the body, it's no different from any other statue. Adolf asks if Detron wants her heart. If that happens, she'll become attached. She's a living person, not simply an artwork. She needs a different kind of attention. There's no need to keep piece that's lost its value. One of a collector's virtues is knowing that to discard. She's a woman who knows her place, so she should understand what to do. But if she doesn't conduct herself properly, then he'll need to step in. Adolf thinks that Detron never ordered the medicine, but it might be a good idea to prepare it in advance. Next we see Riv sitting in bed and thinking, what if this feeling? She was the one who initiated it. And it's not that she didn't foresee this, but she feels somewhat pathetic. It's as if she expected something more from the Marquee and feel betrayed. Their relationship was clear from the start. After that, Corrida's treatment began, and she started visiting Berryworth Mansion regularly. She even started frequenting the mansion's library. Adolf tells the sister that the Marquee has granted them permission to use it. All of this was due to the Marquee's kindness. In time, even Mr. Adolf ended up spending time with Corrida helping with her studies. It's so boring here. Go take care of your business, Riv. Riv tells her sister to wait, but she's already out the door. Our girl rests on the door as she asks what business could she possibly have at Berryworth Mansion. Even during her frequent visits for Corrida's treatment, she was never summoned for any extra hours. Unless the Marquee called for her, she could only wait indefinitely. Someone calls her by her last name, and it catches her attention. She sees that it is Philip. He gives her an easy smile, as she says that she's been cast out again today, he sees. It seems she likes books more than him now. He asks to follow him for a moment. She enters the garden with him and says, wow, and she can see why he was so eager to show her this place. A few minutes ago, Philip tells her that it's this old man's pride and joy. She notices a small golden bird and asks, what's that? We see Cordy and Adolf in the library. Adolf says to her that, but Miss Corrida, doesn't she want to attend school? She says that she can't go to school, as he knows her health isn't the best. He tells her that Dr. Gertrude is very skilled. Doesn't she think she'll get better soon? Has she ever thought about what she'd like to do then? She taps her chin and asks when she gets better. Her parents were master craftsmen. Even the highest nobility would commission work from them. They were very skilled. She wants to have great skills like her parents and make a lot of money. Adolf says that since her parents were famous craftsmen, he's sure she has talent too, Miss Corrida. She asks him if he really thinks so. He tells her yes, and Mazurkan is especially renowned for that. It's a country where many famous craftsmen go to study. How about attending school abroad? She says that sounds wonderful. But Mazurkan is far away. Her sisters surely won't allow it, and it's expensive. Aldov says that Miss Rodeis might think that, but money is something that can be solved. That's why they have patronage systems for those that can't fulfill their potential due to financial reasons. She chose patronage? He says yes, exceptional craftsmanship is akin to fine art, so many people are keen to support such fields. And if she regains her health and wished to pursue her dream, Miss Rodeis wouldn't oppose, would she? He's sure her sister would support her wholeheartedly. Cordia says she would, wouldn't she? Aldov says then, first and foremost, she needs to recover. She says yes, she'll focus on getting better and study hard too. We see our main girl still staring at the golden bird, and she asks, "What's that?" She's never seen a bird with such a vivid golden color. It looks real but doesn't move. Is it a sculpture? Our guy interrupts her and says that it's a taxidermy. The feathers were dyed with a paint mixed with gold powder. She says, oh, she didn't realize he was here. She thinks that this is their first meeting since that day, so why is she so conscious of him? He tells her that she seems to have recovered well. She says, pardon? He says that she didn't. She says she supposes her stamina isn't especially strong. He says then it might be best to work on it. He says that she's had a taste, unless she's planning to refuse. He can't promise she'll have as much time to recover next time. She thinks to herself, so all that time he didn't summon her was because he was giving her time to recover? No, stop overthinking. Then she says that she didn't know she had a choice in the matter. He says that he didn't intend to force anyone who's unwilling. He just knows they have no reason to refuse. She thinks that such arrogant and infuriating words, but he's not wrong. She still desperately needs his help. He asks, weren't they both satisfied? She asks, was he satisfied with her, my lord? He says yes. He says that he's a very discerning collector. She should be proud to have met his standards. She looks away and says that it sounds like he's saying she's become one of his collectibles. He asks her, hasn't she? She opens her mouth, but no words come out. Oddly, at this moment, she remembers Marcel's warning words. Everyone treats him like a priceless statue. Yet he doesn't do the same. She thinks if she should be grateful that such a man considers her a collectible. The feeling from that morning, waking you alone, keeps coming back to her. She feels like she might say something. She shouldn't. She then says, does he collect taxidermies too, her lord? He says that anything valuable is worth owning. She says that she's heard rumors, that he keeps people taxidermied in his basement. He laughs and says that's an amusing rumor. Is she afraid she'll become one? She says that she doesn't believe it. He asks her what it's true. She says that she'd blame her foolish judgment and short-sightedness. He says that won't do. He lifts up her chin and she blushes. He rubs her lips and says, want a living governess, not one beautifully preserved in death. He tells her that he wants a living governess, not one beautifully preserved in death. She flinches from his hold and says where this intimate contact stops is entirely up to the Marquee. And she thinks to herself, and from what she recalls of that night, he certainly won't finish anything within an hour. She addresses him with his title and says that she's come to Berryworth Mansion for Corrida's treatment. She hopes he'll consider that. He says that she's getting good at making demands, Miss Rodeis. She says that it seems that's what he desires. She thinks to herself that he must stay focused, Liv Rodeis, for Corrida's sake. But he says how admirable. She thinks that the Marquise's blue eyes seem to drain one's very soul, like a bewitching gemstone. Then they kiss. If she doesn't stay focused, she might be swallowed whole, deeper and deeper into the abyss. A few days later, the paperboy says read all about the cardinal's visit. The common folk talk among themselves that he's planning to be at the chapel and orphanage for several days. He's also set to attend a big event. Will they be able to go? It seems this time, Lord Ditrion will make a public appearance. Will they finally see his face, even if only in the paper? Next, our main mail's office. He's seated at his office as Adolf addresses him. He says that he has already given the newspapers a heads up, but they're still secretly hopeful. Ditrion says that as if they could publish it, even if they got a photo. Aldov says that they don't know that, though. He's adjusted his schedule to align with the dates. He asks, "Shall they arrange a spot?" Our guy says since he's coming all the way to this rural exile, we should see him. He wants to see this spectacle in person. He's a strong candidate for the next Gracia. Wasn't Cardinal Augustine in the lead? After last year's crushing defeat in the battle between Elba and Torsten, his interna standing seems to have greatly weakened. Shall they look into it further? No need, he can guess the rest. The Gracia, chosen from among the cardinals, is the highest clergyman and the head of the order, a position of the utmost honor respected by all. Of course, the blood shed to obtain that seat is enough to form a river. Adolf says, "Oh, and someone is here from House Malte. They said their letter didn't get received. Abd wanted to deliver the message in person." Ditrion stands and bangs his hands on the table in annoyance. He says in fury that if they couldn't read his reply, it seems everyone in that family must have vision problems. Lady Malte herself is coming. He declines, but still refused to acknowledge it. Maybe she'll realize if she gets shot for wandering around recklessly. The cardinal's visit is under the pretext of peace pilgrimage. Even if they ignore Malte, harming the pilgrimage would provoke the wrath of believers worldwide. No one would dare. So that's why she's being so stubborn. Does she think he'll relent because he's afraid of the order? They were raised the same, but he can't understand why she's so foolish. Ditrion says that it's time to get rid of his nuisance. Book an opera for the date of Lucia's visit. Our guy asks an opera? Aldolf says, and which lady will accompany him? Dideron says Aldolf. Does it really look like he's seeing multiple women? Aldolf addresses him with his title and says that it will cause quite a stir even with Björno. Our male lead says he doesn't care. He never intended to keep it a secret forever. Next we see Riv walking into a room. Million, radiant as always, says, Miss Rodeis, did she see the list of pilgrims? Riv says yes, everyone's talking about it. Million says that it's Malte and her goodness, the very person who caused such a scandal with that broken engagement. Recently, a prominent noble from the neighboring country of Torsten, renowned for producing famous cardinals and politicians, called off an engagement with the Ziegelt family. Lucia Malte, the precious only daughter of the Malte family, was known for her beautiful honey-blonde hair. She was the envy of many young ladies. And Million interrupts her and says not only that, she bravely rejected an arranged marriage for the sake of true love, a courageous, noble lady. Our girl thinks rumors abounded about why she broke off the betrothal everyone assumed was certain. She asks, "So are thy staying here at the barony?" The young star says she doesn't think so. They say she knows Lord Ditrion. Maybe she'll stay at the Marquee's mansion. Riv says that Lady Malte knows the Marquise. Million says, well, high-ranking people often know each other regardless of nationality. And there are rumors that Lady Malte's broken engagement was because of Lord Ditrion. They say the two are in love. The statement darkens our girl's mood. Million continues to speak oblivious to Riv's mood. She says that they say Lady Malte's broken engagement is because of Lord Ditrion. Rumor has it the two are in love. Our girl sighs as she thinks to herself that she thought the Marquis had feelings for her. But it seems that was the extent of their relationship. Million says that with the Cardinal's visit, the Marquis and the Duke of Malte's daughter are destined to reunite. She gushes as she says that it's surprising that the Lord Ditrion is receiving guests at his mansion, and the first guest he receives is Lady Malte, who broke off her engagement for him. She knows that it's just a rumor, but isn't it so romantic? Riv is oblivious to her words as she retracts into her head. Million calls out to her. Riv Finley comes back to the present and says yes. Million fumes and says that she wasn't listening again. Was she? Riv says she's sorry and she was lost in thought for a moment. All right, now that story time is over, shall they begin the lesson? Million says her teacher's name in exasperation. Riv smiles as she thinks his attention, knowing how much harm it can cause. Why does she keep longing for it? After the lesson, Milan gathers her books as she asks Riv if she is really all right. She hasn't been able to concentrate all day. Riv smiles as she says yes. Sorry, she must not be feeling well. She'll make up for today's lesson next time. Million breaks a sweat as she says there's no need for that. But Miss Rodeis, would she be available for dinner tomorrow evening? Our girl asks dinner. Million says yes. Her parents want to host a dinner for her tutors. R thinks that she's not too keen on going out at night. Million urges Riv to come, and she is her favorite. Riv tells her all right, and she should let her know the time and she'll be there. Million shouts in joy, while Riv thinks to herself that she guessed she has no choice. It should be fine from her new place. Meeting parents is part of tutor's duties. Next, we see a dinner table with various guests gathered around it and eating. The blonde man on the head of the table says, "Thank you all for making time. They should please continue to take good care of their million." Riv thinks to herself that these gatherings always feel awkward. She looks across the table and notices her fellow tutor, Mr. Marcel. She thinks that he seems close to the Baron and his wife. She catches the eye of Million's mother and smile, and the older woman returns it. She thinks, what is this? As night draws near, we see our main girl with Million. The two walk through the garden. Million says that her family's garden is even more beautiful at night, so she really wanted to show her. They've lit it up specially for tonight. What does she think? Our girl admits that yes, it's truly beautiful. Next, Million's mom appears and calls out to her in the night. Million and Riv turn around to see her. Our heroine pushes Million toward her mom and says that her mother is calling her. She should go on inside. Million grumbles and says that she wanted to show her around the garden herself. She says that she'll be back soon, so she should please wait here and don't wander off. Riv wanders through the garden. She notices a dark-haired man sitting on a bench near a gazebo. He hears her coming closer and turns to address her with her last name. Riv sees the man is Mr. Marcel. He says that she's come to see the garden too. She says, "Ah, yes she has." He says that flower bed over there is lovely. Shall he show her? She says that it's all right. He seems to know this place. Has he been here often? He smiles and says yes. With the Cardinal's upcoming visit, he's had more reasons to visit Lord Pendance's estate. Riv makes a sound of understanding. He asks her if she remembers what he told her. He mentioned that he knows someone who is accompanying the Cardinal. That person is apparently very close to Lord Maltese' daughter. She bites her lips and proceeds to ask him if he perhaps a noble. He taps his chin and says, yes, that's correct. But his family name isn't worth bragging about. Regardless of his origins, he's just a humble art teacher at the Baron's estate, living an ordinary life. She clenches her hands as she asks if he approached her for another reason. He breaks a sweat and says, no, not at all. He tells her that he likes her. Our girl is surprised by his words and asks why. He scratches the back of his head and says that he didn't mean for it to come out like this. He has a confession to make. It was him who asked the Baroness for this gathering. Riv says pardon? He says that he wanted to get to know her, but it's been difficult to find the chance. So he mentioned that he would love to cross paths with her in one way or another. And so Lady Pendance kindly arranged this meeting for them. She thinks to herself then, that smile meant all that interest she sensed from him this whole time. It was just desire. She tells him that she doesn't appreciate his methods. Unlike him, she's employed as a governess by the Baroness. If he knew she couldn't easily refuse, he wouldn't have been so inconsiderate. He says that he's in the same position employed just like her. She frowns and says that's hard to believe. His expression falters. He says that perhaps he was a bit hasty. It's just that, and his expression falters. He says that he wanted her to know how he felt. Next we see our girl in a church, and she thinks that she didn't come here to pray, but when her mind gets tangled, this is the one place she ends up. She remembers her conversation with our guy, as he says that it's humans who have the power to make things happen, Miss Rodeis. She comes out of the church and runs into an old friend wearing a cloak and sweeping. The friend calls out to her and says that it's been a while since she's visited. Riv says, oh, Father Betriel. She had to move with short notice, so the chapel is a bit farther now. The friend says that still she should visit occasionally. It feels empty without her here. Riv says that she noticed quite a few new faces. The latter says, ah well, there's a rumor that Lord Ditrion attends their chapel. Riv's face lights up in alarm as she says his name. She says that yes, though people seem to be realizing it's just a rumor. So attendance is dwindling again. Our girl thinks surely not, the day the Marquee came to the chapel. 100%. The friend says that why would someone like him visit their chapel? He has the means to meet privately with the priest of the largest chapel in Borno. Our heroine thinks that no one saw did they? Next, we see our main sitting and having dinner. He says that she's not eating much. Does she have another engagement after work? He says that with that man she was speaking with so intimately on the street, perhaps? She breaks a sweat and asks him how does he know? Father Betriel is a novice in training. He doesn't spend time privately with parishioners. He says that recreational activity and clerical life are separate. She says that what she meant to say is she doesn't have any other engagements. He asks then what was the issue. She says according to rumors their paths have overlapped, her lord. She thought it might be wise to be more careful. He asks careful about what? She says that the cardinal and his entourage will arrive soon, and it would be troublesome if strange rumors arose. He asks, troublesome? She says that she heard he's one of the guests he receiving is someone he knows. If there is any misunderstanding, he asks who might that be. She thinks that it seems Million was right. Otherwise he would have cut off the conversation immediately. She says perhaps. She thinks to herself, how can she jealous? She says Lady Malty. He stands up and walks to her and says that he just wanted to provide her with a good meal since she seemed weak. He pulls her up and puts her on the table. She blushes and asks, why is he? He says that it's because he couldn't stand those endearing words. He tells her not to worry, and he has no intention of inviting other guests where she and him roll about. She says that she didn't mean it like that, and looks away. He cups her face and says that he understands how the rumor started, and he can assure her they won't be staying at him estate. Is she satisfied with that answer? She says that who he hosts at his estate isn't her concern. It's entirely up to him, my lord. He was merely asking if his answers satisfies her personal and private curiosity. He hums while waiting for her response, and she says, yes, she's satisfied. He smirks and says that it's his turn to be satisfied. It's time for her second lesson. If you're eager for the next chapter, drop a comment expressing your interest in a part 3. Don't forget to subscribe and ensure to hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time,